Beyond Earth, power changes everything. Not speed, not flags, not headlines. Power. 14 days of darkness. Temperatures near absolute zero. No solar lifeline. If you want to visit, solar might be enough. If you want to stay, if you want to build, there is no substitute. Today's conversation isn't science fiction, it's strategy. Why nuclear power is the enabling capability for the moon, Mars, and deep space. Why the United States has tried and failed to field it. And why the real race isn't about arrival. It's about who defines the rules of operation. Who sets the safety zones, who becomes the hub, who others are forced to work around. Former NASA Associate Administrator for Technology, Policy, and Strategy, Dr. Bhavya Lal, joins me to talk about mission pull, institutional failure, regulatory drag, and what it would actually take to move fast enough to matter. This isn't about fear, it's about capability. Let's begin.
My name is Jason Canigan. I'm the founder of Cold Star Technologies, and I wanted to find out what is really going on in space and defense. So I started interviewing experts in the field, and over the past number of years have met with over 150 academics, engineers, business owners, venture capitalists, military, and government officials. I call this effort the Cold Star Project, and it's where you'll ride along with me to find out what is really going on in space and defense.
Okay, we're here with Dr. Bhavya Lal, which I really appreciate. We've been waiting a long time to do this, and I'm glad you made time to do it. For those who don't know, Dr. Lal is a professor of policy analysis at the Rand School of Public Policy, and most recently, she was NASA's Associate Administrator for Technology, Policy, and Strategy, and has also been its Chief Technologist, if I'm not wrong. So I wanted you to come on and I wanted you to talk about whatever you wanted to talk about that was important to you. And you gave me a few topics of ideas you've been working on, and you've been promoting this idea of the US needs to fly a nuclear reactor, basically. And I'd love to hear in brief why you've been promoting it, kind of give us the elevator pitch on why that needs to happen.
So nuclear is a disruptive capability, especially if you talk about space science and space exploration. The solar system is basically a power desert. Beyond Mars, there's really no solar power to speak of. So if you're going to do exciting new science in the outer solar system, go to interstellar space, or even, exciting science on the moon, say for the lunar night, which is 14 days long, and where temperatures plummet to close to absolute zero, there is no substitute. So nuclear is not just enhancing, it is enabling. So that is kind of the core reason. If you are, even if you're going really close to the sun, the radiation environment is very corrosive. Near Jupiter, anywhere where is there exciting science and exploration to be done, and again, forget science and robotic science, but human exploration, right? I mean, humans need power, life support, environmental control wherever they go. So my byline is, solar lets you visit, nuclear lets you stay and build, and that is the core reason why we want to be, developing nuclear. And again, it's not a new thing. We launched the first nuclear reactor ever in 1965. So this is technology that's not completely novel, and obviously on Earth, we have nearly 20% of the electricity in the United States is generated with nuclear. We have a lot of experience, and it is time.
Okay. In brief, you present a couple options in your paper, and the paper I'll link to it'll be up on my Google Drive, so there'll be a link in the description. Anybody can go read that. So tell us about those options.
So we kind of started our paper, which I co-authored with my colleague Roger Myers. We started with, well, what is the problem we are trying to solve? I'm, an analyst, so I don't like to start with answers. I like to start with questions. What is the problem we're trying to solve, and why haven't we been able to solve it? So, I mean, I did lay out the problem that, we need nuclear, and somehow we're just not able to make it go. We've tried a dozen times in the past and maybe spent close to $20 billion trying to develop space nuclear and somehow failing each time. So we started with, well, why do we fail? And we came up with, a few important reasons. Some of the biggest ones were lack of mission pull. Um, you know, somebody has to say, somebody in a position of leadership, somebody with a bag of money needs to say, this is something we need. And we haven't really seen that happen until recently, and we can talk about that. The second one, and a really important one, is overreach. Instead of starting small and then going big, basically instead of starting with a Wright flyer and then going to the SR-71, we go straight to the SR-71, which is something we did for NASA's JIMO Prometheus program at the start of the 2000-ish. And again, we're not able to do it. It goes over budget, behind schedule, we cancel. So we start with a very ambitious goal. We don't get there, and we give up. And the third and the really important one is sort of fractionated or fragmented leadership. So there's no one part of the federal government which focuses on developing this very, as I called it, a disruptive technology, right? So there's an Office of Naval Reactors within the Department of Energy. Their goal is, it's a standing office with with budgets, and they make sure that our naval reactor program stays solid, stays cutting edge, stays safe. We have never done that for space nuclear. As I said, we start a program, it gets canceled, people, scattered to the winds, we start again, we have to build the capability again. So it goes on and on. So we kind of have this chicken and egg problem. So once we kind of pointed to this as a problem, we felt that there's a whole bunch of things that need to be done in sequence. First, let's show the capability. So first let's make sure there's a mission pull. And we have one now. NASA, in a white paper, fully all in said, power on the surface of Mars is a key capability we need. We need to start working on it. And step one is, let's start with the moon. So that's kind of one thing, mission pull, and we have it. The second one is, we need to show progress. If you put our political cycles are 2, 4, 6 years, right? 4-year presidential administrations, 2 to 6 year congressional timelines. If we do 10-year programs, people lose interest. So what we need to do is to show progress within an administration. So we need to get something exciting and important done by 2028, which is this administration, because then we build that momentum for the next bigger thing, and then the next bigger thing, and the next bigger thing. So, and then there were some other, important sort of, boundaries that we talked about, and I hope your, audience goes and reads the paper, and we actually have some, easy to read, shorter paper versions too. So with all of that in sight, we came up with 2 options. Option 1 was go big or go home. So let's do something big. You want to do, we like big ambitious goal, let's do it. But then let's make sure what we called was to meet the Manhattan Project test. Basically, make sure that there is enough money, there is enough, high level interest, and there is continuity, just like there was for the Manhattan Project. And option 2 was, well, let's do something small, let's do something incremental, let's bring in, commercial entities. Even that is not, even that will take money, but it's a more incremental approach. We called it the chess master's gambit. We actually also had a third option, which we call light the path, which was about radioisotope power systems. So there's, commercial companies that are starting to do really good work on, alternative approaches to radioisotope systems. And they are very close to being able to launch. So let's make that happen. So regardless of whether we pick option 1 or option 2 for fission power, let's go with radioisotope systems. So those were our 3 major options. And of course, there were some other important things that need to go hand in hand. So for example, as we do a smaller demo in 28, we need to be, it shouldn't be a one and done. What's the next thing that comes after that? And so what is the tech maturation that needs to happen? And again, devil's in the details. So that's one thing. And the second important thing is regulatory reform. It takes 4 to 8 years in this country to approve launch of nuclear systems. And that's something that needs to get fixed. So that's kind of the main, the key points in our report I wanted to hit.
Okay. Really, really important. This fracturing in the U.S. government, and that there's no central strategy, goes back to I learned this years and years ago when I interviewed David Walker, the past Comptroller General of the U.S. a couple of times. And we weren't talking about space, we were talking about budgeting and whether the U.S. was going to be a superpower still in 2040. But yeah, you get these, and I learned this in my early 20s when I was reading books on how Congress makes up its mind, right? As soon as a representative gets elected, they got 2 years, right? And then they're immediately thinking, how am I going to get reelected? They're not thinking
Right.
about the country, space, whatever. They're thinking about how am I going to get reelected. So this idea of bunny hops, basically, that you're talking about doing something interesting, demonstrable within 4 years, right? That they can write home to their constituents about and say, hey, let me, let me come back to Washington because I helped make this happen, is a good idea. These long
Right.
programs are really hard to sell. What
Yes.
if you had a batch of representatives in front of you, and I guess they're legislative assistants who often tell them what to prioritize and what not to. What would you say to them if you had a minute to tell them something?
I would say institutionalize this. Let there be
Mm,
an office at NASA or DoD
okay.
to actually promote, to be the critical mass, the holder of technology, the holder of the mission pull. That's one. Second, don't make it parochial.
Mm,
This is a national capability. It is not about Alabama or
hmm
Ohio or California. We need to move together as one. And the third thing I would say is let's sequence and prioritize. I
hmm
understand there isn't enough money to do everything. What comes first? Let's start there, then the next, and so on.
Okay. Very good. And for those wondering, Dr. Lau promoted this idea all through last year, 2025. I mean, you shared with me some different magazine articles uh, online, which I guess I can link to as well. So this isn't a brand new brainstorm. It's been something that she's been working on for a while. Okay.
And a lot of other
Yeah.
people too. I mean,
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
whole community, and
Right.
actually,
Your
one of the
co-author.
problems we have is we have this, we have really experienced older people who worked on programs from the 60s, but
hmm
then we stopped everything. So we actually have a workforce issue in the middle. So
Mm-hmm.
I hope we have a chance to build on that as well.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, this idea of that's a big deal for me too, because I'm very interested in organizational culture and memory and how it stores things. And we know in NASA things get lost, right? As people retire and skills, even the welding skills, right? How do we put these engines together gets lost, right? So yeah, maybe we still have the blueprints, but the ability to do it has to be remade. So okay. Here we are in early 2026. Your strategy calls for a 2030 demonstration. You just mentioned 2028. How are we going to do this? And are we already too late to beat China to that lunar South Pole?
Yeah, so I guess if you mean sort of, I'm assuming you don't mean humans planting a flag, because I don't think that's the prize.
Yeah.
The prize is being first to have, long-term enduring presence, creating, what I call facts on the moon that everyone else has to work around. South Pole is scarce. The places you want are where you can pair ice access with long duration illumination. And again, if a rival becomes the first operator of reliable power there, they become the hub. And then three things happen. One, safety exclusion zones become leverage, even if framed as hazard prevention, which they would be legitimately able to say. In practice, they can shape who can operate where. Second, norms get set by default because the first operator defines what counts as too close or what's harmful interference. And third, partners cluster around the actor who can keep equipment alive through darkness and emergencies. In short, this is not a race to arrive, it's a race to define operating precedent. So, to your question, are we
hmm
too late? No, but early 2030s is the credibility line. And after that, we are basically arguing about, a paper reactor against somebody else's operating reality.
Okay, that was a really great answer. I really like how you laid that out. It's visceral, right? You can clearly see what we're up against. You're
What's at
really
stake.
jumping into the space law area there as well with the norms and that. And I know, yeah, but they'll turn into it, right? Well, and the worst thing and the most common thing in organizations is to say, well, this is the way we've always done it. And this is how you get there, right? Is
Right.
all right, we did this and this is how we did it. And so that's the way we always need to do it now, right?
Yes.
Until something terrible happens and then everybody goes, maybe we should look at this again. So let's say
Right.
that a Chinese nuclear reactor actually is put there. What does that mean for U.S. strategic interests?
So first of all, I don't think that we should let another country define, what our strategic interests are really.
Hmm.
I start from first principles. We do things in space of what we want to do. If our reason is because China, we end up building a brittle program that swings with headlines. An adversary should not get to write our requirements documents, right? So that's kind of the first thing. But second, I think it is, it's vitally important that we achieve our goals in space, and nuclear is a pretty key capability. And again, I want to say it plainly again, we should put a reactor on the moon because there are things we want to do, not because we are trying to box someone else out. That's a terrible reason to explore space. Exploration is not a defensive crouch. It's supposed to be an expansion of what's possible. Science does, that does not ration what's, which is pretty much what we've had to do up until now. Instruments that run through the lunar night, infrastructure that makes the moon a place you can work, not just visit. Again, if you anchor the case in fear, you end up designing a brittle program. You overspec it, you politicize it, and eventually, it will collapse under its own righteousness. And this is history we don't want to repeat. So yes, there is a strategic concept, and we should not be naive about it. The first continuously operating surface power system, as we just discussed, can shape norms, safety practices, and where partners choose to build, and that matters. But the positive case is the one that lasts. A lunar reactor is a tool of capability. It turns the moon from a series of stunts, which is, kind of what we've done, into a platform. It makes sustained operations, manufacturing, deep drilling, high date rate communications, and serious science possible. And that is a posture I want for the United States. Not deny others, but build the world that others want to be part of. So when someone asks, is China real or is it misdirection? My answer is, it is real enough that we should move, but the reason we move is not them. The reason is move is us. We don't go to the moon to keep other people out. We go to the moon to open the future up.
Okay. This could be a tough one for a lot of government people, I think, who understand realpolitik, and denial of things to the opponent is a big part of that. And they're going to
Yeah,
have
and
to get
again,
over that and not say, well, roll their eyes and go, well, that's just idealism, right? And so I think that's going to require an ongoing conversation and booster shots for them. I think on keeping that idealism, because we don't want to get into this Doctor Strangelove situation. Mr. President, we cannot afford a mine shaft gap at the end of
right.
the movie, right? They're
Yes.
doing something, so we need to move. We need to be the initiator. I really like that positioning. Um,
Right. And again, I mean,
yeah,
I'm not naive. I mean,
yeah,
this is how we get money. So, I mean, so when I was at
mhm,
NASA, making the case that, oh, we need to land on the moon before China does, it
mm,
gets you money. So,
yeah.
we need to go into it with our eyes open. But I think we also need to remember that reality is we should be doing what's in our best interests,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, like I guess using it as a springboard, right? Of okay, yeah, we do need to do something here. Boing.
Right.
But now let's make it, about something bigger than just
Yeah.
Like the American program coming into existence because of Sputnik or something, right? We don't need to be reactive. Why should we be reactive, right? We should
And
be
there's no
strategic.
reason to not leverage it, right? I mean,
Hmm.
John F. Kennedy did leverage Yuri Gagarin's first flight,
Hmm.
right? But in exchange, we did get to build a great space program.
Hmm. Right.
So I don't think it's one or the other. I think we can, we can do both, but we need to keep the eye on the ball.
Hmm. Okay. Let's talk about Draco nuclear thermal propulsion program. Far as I understand it, DARPA canceled it mid last year, saying, "Hey, look, we've got declining launch costs. Thank you, SpaceX." Yeah. So how, like you could have argued about 100 strategic imperatives, right? That you could have picked. Why this one? Why space nuclear development?
So first, let's just make sure that we don't misunderstand what happened with Draco. I mean, the
Hmm.
launch cost argument was a convenient stopping point. It wasn't the core issue. Cheap launch buys mass to orbit. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't buy what nuclear actually gives you. It
Mm-hmm.
it it doesn't buy power
Yeah.
density, power continuity, survivability. It doesn't buy us a power plant in deep space or surviving through a 2-week lunar night. That's what nuclear offers. And in fact, Draco's cancellation was basically supporting a report's diagnosis that space nuclear fails when it's treated as a technology
Mm.
project instead of a fielded capability driven by a mission pull. And up until now, DoD hasn't really at the highest levels expressed a mission pull. In fact, even when Congress asked Space Force, do you need nuclear propulsion? Space Force kind of gave a mealy mouthed answer and kind of let's watch and see, and let's see how it fits with the overall, force projection posture. So, I mean, that's not how you develop a capability. I mean, in short, I mean, launch abundance, which is the argument that DARPA gave, it doesn't substitute for power abundance. Wait, so I just answered the first part of your question. There was
Hmm.
a second part. I
Well,
think I think
yeah,
I
I
did
guess I
answer.
guess out of all the possible things you could have chosen to promote, why this idea? And I know it's not the only thing that you're promoting. How
You
did
mean
this make the
thinking.
short? How did this make the short list?
So, I mean, I think about, what are our goals? And I think that's a fabulous question, Jason. And I think I wish more people would start there. Like, what is it that we are trying
Hmm.
to do here? We're not trying to push a particular technology. I mean, there's a lot of technologies to push.
Yeah.
ISAM, in space service assembly and manufacturing is super important. And again, one I spend a lot of time thinking about. Communications technology, quantum. I mean, yes, there is, a smorgasbord of technologies we could be pushing, but and first, the same point I want to make, we can't, in our, no matter what we say, we have a zero sum budget situation. So we have to sequence things, what comes first and then what next. I think power is a pretty core capability for us expanding into the solar system. And again, I want to come back to like, why do we even want to do that? So, it's different reasons for different people. For whole swath of people in the space community, going into space is a hedge against civilizational ending of civilization. Something goes wrong on Earth, some I don't know, asteroid hit, pandemic, we need a plan B. It is for some people. For some people, and for me in particular, bringing the solar system into our economic sphere. And again, I'm stealing this from President Bush's science advisor, Jack Marburger, who used to say that. So, there's all these resources out there. We need to have access to them. And, power is everything. I don't know if you remember watching Apollo 13, but there was this one scene in which they're all fighting about what do we do, there's duct tape and rulers and all sorts of things. And this guy comes and goes, guys, you don't understand, power is everything. And then he kind of lays out why you need all this power, and they start switching off the system so they have power till the end for the last burn. And again, I'm kind of joking about the movie, but power is kind of at the heart of anything we do. And again, if you're a Star Trek fan, every episode, every planet they go to, there is like a power source. So you can't really do anything without power. And again, other things are important as well, and we need to be investing in them as well. And again, it isn't one or the other, but Let's prioritize. We are going to be on the moon soon. Let's get the ability to build a larger base, ability to mine resources, ability to do big science, and for all of that, nuclear power is kind of a duh for me.
Yeah, makes sense. My first job out of college was with a packager of industrial gas turbine generator sets, and I put together the equipment specs for all the models, standardized everything, and put their pricing and costing and international sales program together. And learned a lot, obviously, about the technical side of it. And for those who don't know, there's a thing called power quality, and you don't want to look on your oscilloscope and see it doing this, right? It's that would be bad. It needs to be clean. It needs to be regular. To be useful, and every society that's managed to get a power surplus for itself has done very well. This
Right.
is this is important. This is, we want to get to the point where we have a surplus of this and aren't counting our cookies basically and going, well, I don't know, the rationing idea, right, is a good one to get out of. So
Right.
I think Star
And
Trek's
even
a good mention. If I go back to my teenage years, you remember the warp core with that thing going up all the time, right? That was a big part of it. Um,
yes.
so yeah, you mentioned a number of good points there about why
Yeah, and I guess
power is
I
so
should just
important.
also add, it isn't just nuclear power. Nuclear power is just part of the portfolio. Sometimes you need batteries and then solar power and chemical, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, one part of the full picture.
Complement of things. Right. And batteries don't always work well in the cold, as some
Or in an
Tesla owners have
abrasive
found out.
environment. Yeah,
Very corrosive. Right, right. For those wanting to know a little bit more about the moon, go and find my playlist with Dr. Paul Van Suzante from Michigan Tech, because from our first episode we talked about what the heck is wrong with the moon, right? The gaskets get shredded on the astronaut space uniforms or whatever. I'm blanking on the name of what you call those things right now, but in like 4 missions, they're useless because the surface there is like glass, right? The little bits of stuff. I need to review it to get my vocabulary back, but
and we
that's
read that
that's
when the
very
Apollo
important.
astronauts came back, their hands were just, bloodied from all the,
Hmm.
the sharp glass of the lunar regolith.
Regolith,
So
right, right.
yeah.
There's the word. There's the word. So, yeah, it's it's a harsh environment. And also for those who don't know, the power you generate generally goes into batteries, which then feed your equipment, and that is part of what gives you that power factor quality stuff. So that everything's regulated. It's usually not directly from the motor, right, into the machine. So, okay. Well, let's talk about funding then. How realistic is it that your Manhattan Project test for option one, those conditions, could actually be met? Or do we just have to kind of take our lumps and go, well, option two is really the viable path here?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean that's why we created that Manhattan Project test, to make sure that if we are going to go big, we can follow up with the money needed. We are very good at making, laying out ambitious goals, but then somehow the money doesn't show up, and that's not fair to all the wonderful people in government at NASA and industry, because now suddenly they have this giant goal and not the funding. So actually in some way maybe, and again, I've continued to think since the report was done, maybe we need to stop framing this as choosing between option one versus option two. The real strategy: start small and grow big. And again, we kind of lay this out in detail. And I mentioned, you don't get the SR-71 by writing the requirement for the SR-71 in the first year. You need to go
Mhm.
step by step with real hardware learning. We need to fly stuff. Overreach is the enemy. The fastest way to lose is to load the first system with every requirement and every stakeholder desire and every future mission fantasy. The winning move is a demo first with ruthless discipline, Jason,
Mhm.
minimal requirements, clear success criteria, a timeline that forces decisions. Prove that the reactor and the power conversion stack in an operationally relevant environment, then scale. I mean, this is how we build big things in aerospace. Apollo didn't start at
Right.
Apollo. It started with Mercury and then Gemini and then Saturn 1 and Saturn 5. iteration plus visible wins created that political durability. And same story commercially. Falcon 1 came before Falcon 9. Falcon 9 came before Starship. Hardware first, then scale. So, so yes, option 2 is the viable path now because it is built for normal politics and it produces proof. If you stack enough proof, enough momentum, and enough institutional ownership, you can create the conditions where something closer to option 1 becomes possible later. So yes, so I guess one way to say it might be, you earn Manhattan Project conditions, you don't declare them, because
That's good.
declarations can be rescinded as we've seen in the past.
Right. Well, and it's also ridiculous to try and make that jump in one go for many reasons. I think of again Dr. Suzante. I cannot believe I couldn't remember the phrase spacesuits. I could I just blanked on that. But they he takes his students to NASA and they compete in these Watts on the Moon challenges, right? So NASA's already interested in power there, obviously, and finding out new ways of can we do this and how do you stand up to the conditions. Both Colonel Nicholas Moran, also known as the Chieftain, and a sort of literature investigator, feral historian who I've had on as guests in the last year, brought up this story from Arthur C. Clarke that talked about it's called superiority, the the difference between two warring civilizations, one which tried to make these wonder weapons and started off in a better technological place, and the other one just plodded along, making more and more and more, and incrementally improving it. And it's told from the point of view of the losing side of the ones who tried to do these giant leaps, right? And you look at it ourselves. When I had Colonel Eric Felt on, we talked about the 17, 18-year cycle of development for planes and things like that. I was looking up one model that had a 30-year development, right, to get it going, right? This stuff doesn't happen instantly, and I think in order to get that funding, you do have to go with the little bunny hops and go, look, we did a thing here. It's interesting, and it takes us to the next step. So, we got these
Yeah.
policymakers. Oh, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I mean, that's what we used to do. We had compressed timelines. The
Mhm.
F-117 is such a great example. And then somehow we forgot speed, and we just became giant and lumbering. And I think we need to
Mhm.
go back to, and again, maybe going back is a wrong thing. We still need to go forward. We have better technology, we have better, automation tools, we have better building tools. But yeah, we do need to figure out how to speed up development.
Mhm. That's another point that Eric Felt made was that we have to get away from this McNamara 60s giant lumbering, as you say, Defense Department or Department of War, or whatever they want to call it now, um, procurement process and development process, right? In order to make innovation happen more quickly and not take I made a kind of a joke about it, but it's true, right? A kid gets born and it takes the entire timeline of his life till he's of age to go fly the plane that just got started to be invented, right? When he was and developed when he was
Right.
born.
And part
That's
of the
crazy.
reason is a structural dysfunction of our system. So, for
Mm,
example, again, I don't know if it's true, but I had heard that the F-35 has at least one job in each of our districts, congressional districts.
mm,
So the way you get things done is you get, parochial interests lined
yeah.
up. And when you have those parochial interests, then the goal isn't to meet the mission, the goal is to create a jobs
Hmm.
program. And if you want to, I mean, if that's a primary goal, then speed isn't relevant because, the bigger and the longer lasting the program is, the more jobs there are. So that's a win.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's like the rat catchers in New York, right? It's not in their interest to eliminate the rats. It's in their interest to have billboards up portraying this long twilight struggle against the rats, right? We're fighting and it goes on. We keep these jobs, right? We don't want the project to end.
Right.
And we see this in missile development all the time. I remember when I first started looking 6, 7 years ago at how funding for missiles worked. I couldn't believe how much money was thrown at it. And every week, right? Every week is like, okay, 400 million here, a billion there, right? Is put into this program and it just keeps going.
Right.
Let's talk about regulatory issues. If you could pick one regulatory fix that you think would have the biggest impact in the shortest time, what would it be? And could it really happen without congressional action?
So historically, space approval for space nuclear launch has ranged from 4 to 8 years. And again, we didn't have fission systems; we had radioisotope power systems. But that's about how long it took to provide approval, and hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you want one fix with the biggest impact in the shortest time, it is this: put licensing on a clock and collapse decision velocity. I guess you will say, well, these are new systems. We want to be safe. Does speeding things up actually make us safe? And my response to that would be, speed and safety aren't incompatible. In fact, the way we do this today, with endless sequential reviews and ambiguous ownership, it can actually make us less, not more safe, because you get churn, you get redesigns, you get relitigation of old decisions, you get teams optimizing for, and just we talked about this process survival instead of engineering clarity. And we have this whole sort of class of, regulators and safety experts emerging because it is now a job category. So again, the second part of your question, the fastest win is not a new law, although if there is one, that's fine too. But the win is a governance fix, a single owner authorization path with a time-bounded integrated review process. And this is important, embedded regulators from day one, not regulators showing up at the end with a red pen, but regulators in the room while you design. So safety is designed in, not inspected in. And again, I just want to say this again. We need to design safety into our system and not come at the end and be looking for it. And so can it happen without Congress? I mean, again, it would be, laws matter, laws have teeth. But in some ways, this is mostly about who has the pen and how the interagency process is run. You can set an owner, set the clock, and force integrated review without rewriting the statute. So it's about speed, I guess, is the short answer to your question.
Okay. I like that a lot. It makes me think of three things. One, I talked to a guy named Rand Simberg on this show some years ago now, who talked
I
about
know
this
Rand.
speed versus safety, right? And not everybody liked that. I got a bunch of thumbs down on that one, which YouTube doesn't care about. It just wants action, right? Interaction. It doesn't care whether it's good or bad, just stay on the platform. But I noticed that, right? The second thing was in my work with Dr. Rick Fleeter of Brown and La Sapienza in Rome, we talked a lot about small sat quality, because before SpaceX, that field had a 40% failure rate. And a lot of it was from this: you've got a fixed thing, which is the launch date. That ain't moving, right? And then you've got this supply chain, and we got to get our pieces together, and we got to make sure that they work together. And oh, this didn't show up, or this is broken. We have to get another one. And that time gets taken out of the testing period at the end. It can't be recovered anywhere else. And so these guys were crushing that testing period, like you're talking about. They're doing the inspection at the end instead of throughout, right? They never thought about parallel processing, which was really interesting to me. And so the thing would go up and it wouldn't be tested, and 4 times out of 10 it would break and not work, right? And so
Right.
SpaceX has improved that rate a lot, I'm sure. Um, it really is fun to watch them launch and shoot out 60 satellites in like 20 minutes, right? That's operational excellence. I love it. So those are a couple things off the top of my head that come up when we're talking about this speed versus safety thing. Just building it into the process. Oh, and the third one was and this isn't me, this is a talk from the guy who really likes to do the Japanese, Imperial Japanese Navy, Jonathan Parshall, did a talk, I think around 2011, to a bunch of World War II guys at a event, talking about German production lines versus American and Russian production lines. And the Germans did what you talked about. They had an inspector at the end. Yep, that paint job's really great. Maybe we want to put the weather top on this one, the water, barrier or something like that. It's no good. Send it back, right? And what it made the Germans do was they built beautiful war machines, but there weren't very many of them, and they were super expensive and super slow. Meanwhile, the Americans with the Shermans were just going, is this the best tank we could develop? No. Back to the superiority example, right? But we'll just keep spitting them off the production line. And the Russians were doing the same. Like, how can we reduce the number of parts? How can we make this take a shorter time? They tried underwater welding and anything that would make that um, T-32 or whatever, an easier thing to get off the production line and building it to specs that they knew. Like, look, this thing is only going to go so many miles, and within 24 hours of battle, it's likely it's going to get knocked out. So why should we build it to perfection? Right. So some real things to think about there, folks. If you're in a position to decide speed versus safety or quality, right? Building to the need here. Now it's nuclear power, so we do we do want to treat this with some caution, but we don't need multiple layers of redundant scrutiny, right? Looking at this thing and slowing it down. All right. Your option two relies on public-private partnerships, but as far as I understand it, space nuclear doesn't meet all the COTS, the commercial off-the-shelf success criteria. So, and having watched this field and been in it, right, and talked to so many people over these many years, right, 6, 7 years that I've been doing this show and focused on space. Are we being overly optimistic about commercial readiness, or is there really genuine private sector capability that can deliver on a 2028 or 2030 timeline?
So Jason, I agree with your basic premise. Space nuclear is not COTS.
Hmm.
If by COTS you mean a mature commercial market with lots of private demand and many buyers, that is not what we have in the near term, and that is not what we meant to say in the report. Option two is not a pipe dream about spontaneous commercial markets. It's a
Right.
deliberate choice of mechanism, and the mechanism is you get paid for delivering. Milestone-based public-private partnerships with clear technical outcomes, schedule gates, and real consequences for not hitting them. And the reason is that, the reason that matters is incentives. Traditional cost plus contracts can be necessary sometimes, no doubt, but they do not naturally reward speed or innovation, the things we've been talking about. They reward compliance, they reward process, and almost even extending and expanding the program. So if you want hardware by 2028, by 2030, you need a structure that makes schedule and execution the center of gravity. And again, this is not any company can do it. You still need to pick qualified teams. The point is not to lower the bar on capability. The point is to change the bar on performance and accountability. Think of it as government directed, industry executed. The government sets a mission pull and the safety and performance requirements, budgets. Industry competes to meet them under milestone discipline. And again, on commercial readiness, the private sector has real capabilities in pieces of this. But again, option two doesn't assume there is a market pull, that the market will pull it across the finish line. It assumes the program structure will. Again, option two is not cost optimism. It is incentive realism. Pay for outcomes, not effort. And again, the last thing I guess I would say is, even in Apollo, the government didn't build anything. The money went out to Grumman and North American company, and so it was all in the private sector.
Right.
It's just what the change here is the way the incentives are structured.
Okay. Made me think of a bunch of things there. Bill Connolly's interview with me on how Roosevelt turned America into the arsenal of democracy from what Time magazine called a few nice boys with BB guns before getting into the war, right, at World War II. Did the same thing, brought in a guy who was very well respected in the private realm and said, hey, organize will you? And help us do this rather than creating a bureaucracy and a top-down, again, what the Germans did, right? Having inspectors on the line and us telling you they gave the requirements, um, and then let industry figure out how to build it in the cheapest, best way that they could. And that worked out very, very well. So we have a history of doing that, um, and we could definitely do it again, but it's going to take some effort. That does that lane exist already? Is there some process that's in place that we could use, or do we have to come up with that?
Well, I mean, NASA and actually even DoD has, lots of different ways we have structured our contracts to make sure that, the incentive is around, schedule and performance rather
Hmm.
than just, spending the money.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples. I mean, even commercial cargo and crew is a legitimate example of us paying when we get the product. HLS, and I understand things are slower, but that is another example of where when the contractors get paid on delivery. CLIPS program is it's not a COTS kind of thing. It is a service contract, but the same idea. So I think the government has been and is being very innovative about trying different ways to see what works, and not everything will work for everything. For some things, you need a cost plus contract. Um, some things you don't want to hand off to commercial. But for others, it does matter. So an example might be, and again, we are not ready for it, the government purchases power on the moon, purchases water on the moon, purchases and comm services on the moon. So it doesn't build that infrastructure, but pays for it to be built. So there's lots of different ways. And again, there are models in other sectors. So, vaccines or drugs, the concept of, again, I'm forgetting the term, but you make a commitment to future payments. So
Hmm.
if you can build a vaccine for malaria or COVID or whatever, you get paid. So we commit to buying X million pieces of the drug if you develop it, right? So those purchasing agreements, sort of things. There's a term for it. And again, in the space sector, we have talked about power purchasing agreements. We
Hmm.
have them on Earth here, on terrestrial in the United States. So there's I think there's some saying that the future exists already. It's just in pockets.
Hmm. Okay.
so so I
That's
think we
certainly one of the issues with kind of working with NASA, just trying to figure out how to access it and talk to it. Or the DoD. Eric Felt and I talked about that as well. We used to have, and I studied these for years, SIBRs and STTRs, right? And that money, as far as I know, that's gone now, right? It's also at the wrong technology readiness level for what we're trying to do here. So if a person is listening and went, "Hey, I could actually do something about that in the time required," where would they go? Who would they speak to? How would they start?
So yeah, so I'm not a specific expert, but I can find out and let you know. But there are offices at DoD and NASA that are specifically created for bringing in disruptive ideas. Most government agencies have prize programs where
Hmm.
they put out a challenge, and anybody in the world can apply and solve that specific problem. At NASA, the Space Technology Mission Directorate has lots of programs around this kind of thing. You mentioned SBIR, STTR. Those are good ways, and yeah, so maybe we can correspond after this
Sure,
podcast, and I can
sure.
I can find out and let you know.
Yeah.
But this is something we work, and the government works very hard to bring in new ideas.
Yeah. And well,
Are
and this
not
is an issue though, and you pointed it out. I mean, who better than the person who was in NASA to talk about this stuff? And yet it's kind of obtuse, right? It's obscured. Um, and this is why people are hiring Eric Felt to help them navigate this stuff and find a place to go. Because yeah, you go into the 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 technology development areas, and there might be one open solicitation. And I looked at that the first time I looked at that. I had to go to Gordon Ressler and say, "What does this mean?" And I don't think I'm a dumb guy, but like I looked at it and I went, I don't know what to do with this, right? Um, so it is confusing for people outside, and the clearer that we can make that path and advertise it, right? That hey,
right.
start here with a big arrow down. I think that will really help. Okay. Is space nuclear fundamentally a domain, and I know we've talked about this a little bit before, where we need to compete and win against China, or and here's the second part, is there a cooperative pathway? This is the one that we haven't explored, that we could go down that also serves American interests.
Yeah, I mean, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. I start from first principles. We do
Yeah.
things in space because of what we want to do. If our reason is because China, we end up building a brittle system
Hmm.
that basically, swings with headlines.
Yeah.
But again, to your point, this is not a binary. The real answer is sometimes you compete and sometimes you cooperate, and you do both, but you do both from a place of capability. So where is competition real? Competition absolutely shows up when you're talking about infrastructure and precedent. I mean, again, think lunar surface power. The first actor to run a continuously operating power system, doesn't have to be nuclear, is not just generating electricity. They are writing the operating manual everyone else ends up living under. What counts as too close, what the safety standoff should be, how emergency shutdown is handled. How do you coordinate, again, in an Earth orbit, space traffic management? How do you coordinate traffic and logistics so our satellites and our, human space stations aren't, bumping against each other? So you need to have that capability so you can actually compete. However, there are times when cooperation is enlightened self-interest. A good example is, again, I was just talking about space debris. A collision cascade doesn't respect borders. If one operator creates a debris cloud in a critical orbit, everyone pays. Higher costs, higher risks, less usable space. And that is exactly the kind of domain where even adversaries end up practicing cooperation, because the alternative is, mutually assured self-harm.
Hmm.
Another one, again, related to this idea, space rescue. If humans are in distress, just recently there were Chinese astronauts that were stuck on their space station. Earlier on, they were, American astronauts, again, they weren't stuck, but they were delayed and things could have been worse. So this is where, the moral instinct should match the practical one. You want shared protocols, you want shared calm standards, and the ability to help without negotiating terms while, when some astronaut is running out of oxygen. And again, there's precedent. Even at sea, rival navies have rescue norms because everyone understands the stakes. Another one of my favorite examples is planetary defense. If there's an asteroid on a trajectory with meaningful probability of hitting Earth, the right response isn't, hey, it's my deflection mission, and don't use your deflection mission. I mean, the right response is shared detection, shared tracking, shared modeling, coordinated action. Nobody gets bonus points for national pride if the rock hits the planet, right?
Right.
So, and again, I guess we tie it together. The frame is lead with capability. That is like non-negotiable across the board, but cooperate where outcomes are shared. But and also at the same time, never let the adversary define your purpose. Build the systems we need for exploration, science, infrastructure, and then from that foundation, we choose where competition protects our interests and where cooperation protects our interests. So I guess my closing line on that would be like, let's not outsource our strategy to the adversary. We define what we want to build, where we compete, where precedent matters, and we define when cooperation, what is cooperation based on where physics makes it a shared fate.
Okay. Good. And there's plenty of examples, some fiction, but some real of cooperation. We think of The Martian, where the opposite thing happened, right? Where in that story, the Chinese helped out rescue the American, right? 2010, the year we made contact, this movie, I've got to rewatch that. I haven't seen it since I was a teenager, but I know there's international cooperation in that.
That's right.
And even the ISS, which for years and years and years, you had to take a Russian rocket to get up there, right?
Right.
It wasn't an independent thing, and it's actually in the name. As a matter of fact, I've got to go hunt down Mike Reed again because I interviewed him for this show 3 years ago, 4 years ago. He's the manager of the ISS Business and Economic Development Office. Um, he's going to need another job at some point. So I'm interested in finding out what he's doing next. But yeah, these precedents do exist. You've got to find out, the what's in it for me, for them. But sometimes it's not too hard, like with the asteroid planetary defense thing. It's like, well, if we get bopped, we all get bopped. It's not,
Right.
it's
I mean,
not
if
very
there's a
good.
tsunami in the
Yeah.
South China Sea,
Yeah.
we can't just assume that it won't hit us, right?
Hmm. Right, right. Sorry, just made me think of the Great White Fleet, Teddy Roosevelt's tour around the world, and those ships got caught up in a hurricane and started smacking into each other, causing problems. So yeah, it can happen. Okay. One final question, Dr. Lal, and I don't want you to speak badly about anybody or anything, but I am very curious from you've had some really great positions now, really great roles. You've seen from a height. Um, what were the good things and what were the things that you saw that could be improved that you feel allowed to talk about?
So I think one really good thing, and again, I'm assuming you're talking about the previous administration. Or are you talking about the current one? Sorry,
It doesn't
clarify.
really matter. Yeah, it's I mean you can put what lens you want on it. It's you're the one giving the answer, but just with the whole space field in North America or worldwide even. I'd be interested in it, whether it's regulatory stuff or just what's getting in the way. Because I remember, I guess if I can add a little more color to this, 2019, the fall of 2019 was when I really committed to making this show a space and defense show, right? And commercial space was all the rage. It was a fashionable idea. Money from venture capital was starting to flow into it. We've had a couple of rounds through those. The weak companies have died off. The companies that promised something and didn't deliver, those funds have died off now, right? And we had a bit of a boost of it during COVID, but I think after 2022, it's really gotten a lot quieter. I haven't seen a whole lot, right? The last huge thing was that momentous reverse SPAC thing or whatever, right? Um, which I didn't like at all. But so why are we not moving forward as fast as personally I believe we should?
Okay, so that's a slightly different question, but let me start with
Sure.
one good thing that has happened with both of the prior administrations that, for once we've had continuity of purpose, right? The first
Okay.
Trump administration, set the direction to Artemis to the moon and then
Hmm.
Mars, and then the Biden administration came and they said, we will stick with the plan. I think it is a terrible idea that throughout history we're going to the moon, we're going to Mars, we're going to the moon, Mars, asteroid. I mean, I think it's crazy. We waste so much time. It's
Yeah.
just churn. And again, in light of what the adversary is doing, I mean, they are moving step by step forward, right? So for us to do this constant whiplash, ping pong things is
Hmm.
just so destructive. So I think that is one great thing. And again, the second Trump administration has stuck with the program. So we've now had 3 administrations in a row that are saying, we're going to go to the moon. We will have enduring presence on the moon, and I am just thrilled to bits that
Hmm.
we are able to do that as a country. To your very last point, sort of what is holding us back? I think these are things that happened over, let's say, the slowness of our system. I think it is just such a long, decades of going a certain way. Then suddenly putting a brake and
Hmm.
reversing is just really hard. Some of it is, some of the slowness is kind of tied into statutes. Congress wants some things that slow us down. So, for example, when I was at NASA, I found sometimes OTA, other transaction authority, isn't well liked by Congress because
Huh.
it takes away their control, right?
Okay.
It puts too much control to the
Hmm.
agency. So Congress typically like cost plus because then they can help strengthen, expand the size of programs, make them long lived for parochial interest. So some of it is just hard to break, and but I think as a community we are seeing how important it is for us to move at speed, and there so changes are underway. But one thing I do want to be careful about is, we kind of swung the pendulum to too much regulation, too much policy. I want to make sure we just don't sort of instinctively go completely the other way around and just, you know, return to, the wild, wild west of that, I guess 20s. There is need for policy. There is need for careful thinking. So, a good example is space data centers. I mean, it's a brilliant idea,
Mm-hmm.
but let's make sure. And again, I'm even putting the technical issues aside and even the economics aside. But from a policy perspective, we typically, privatize profits, and we socialize externalities, so socialize negative things. So if, for example, when a satellite company is providing communications services, they make all the money. However, if one of their satellite hits another satellite and creates a cascade of debris, the taxpayer pays, right? So I think we just need to make sure that we are, any sort of big things we do, we are not just putting taxpayer on the hook to clean things up. So let's say some company has 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer panels all over space, or millions of satellites, and God forbid the company goes bankrupt. Like, what is the plan? Who's going to pay? We're not going to ask China to pay, right? It's going to be us paying for all of that, the taxpayer, to clean up things. So we just need to think about some of those things and make sure that the public doesn't get screwed as we move forward with innovation.
Okay, very
Because
good.
the
Yeah,
public
yeah.
has as many lobbyists as the companies do.
Okay. Yes, folks, governments are responsible for the acts of their citizens. You can go back to listen to, I've got a whole playlist of space law interviews on this channel, starting with fellow named Johnson, and he really laid it out. And I've had many, many other great guests on to talk about it. Also, the space debris thing and the who's responsible and how do we take these things down. You might think, well, the government, okay, that's fine, but what about like the Soviet Union and Russia, right? Russia doesn't say, okay, we're taking responsibility for all those Soviet things up there. They say, oh, what are you talking about? I don't know. That was something else, somebody else, right? So now we've got all this, orbital debris and items up there that are kind of unassigned. I would highly recommend, if you haven't done it, go to Leo Labs, Google the Leo Labs orbital uh, graphic representation in real time. It's quite a thing, right? We used to have other versions of this, but that's the one that's survived. And you will be astonished at how many things are up there, and in many, many orbits. The first
And I
time,
think
I show it to people, their
that's
jaws
also a
drop.
really good example of private innovation, right? I mean, before DoD did all of the the space situation awareness SSA services provision, and now there are all these amazing private companies like Leo Labs doing the kind of stuff. Like, they actually are helping the rest of us understand what the issues are, and kind of finding that balance between sky is falling and that nothing to see here, folks, right? So it's all about that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's been interesting to watch that idea become fashionable because, and I've talked about this before, folks like Moribajah, when I first started again back in 2019, all the military and politicians were going, orbital debris, what are you talking about, right? But a few years later, suddenly it was a popular idea, and everyone was like, of course we're talking about this. So, folks, don't underestimate the power of fashion, the fashion of an idea in space as well as anywhere else. It gets things done if you can make
Right.
something
And also,
fashionable.
don't underestimate innovation even within that. So in the olden days, which is like maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the only way to get, debris down is like grab it, pull it down, burn it up in the atmosphere, basically using atmosphere as an incinerator. Now there's new ideas about, for example, can we nudge debris with lasers and move it out of the way? I mean, there's so many different creative ideas that we need to be thinking about, and a lot of these newer players are doing that. And again, the government has a really big role there, kind of doing the systems engineering analysis. So this laser idea I'm talking about was actually funded by NASA and led by my close friends and colleagues, Tom Colvin and Jericho Locke. And they looked at every mitigation and remediation measure that we know of, and they did a cost benefit analysis, and they basically showed what works when. And that kind of work isn't going to get done by the private sector. Only the government can fund that sort of thing, right? So it's like we all need to play together.
Right, right. That's a thing I learned from Andy Aldrin was
the need for that some projects, because I came in this with a business mindset, right? Business background. Everything has got to pay for itself. And I quickly learned that that economic model just doesn't work for some of these things, and that some problems do have to be solved at that level. Okay.
Right.
Let me finish off by asking you, Dr. Lau, who do you want to talk to? What kind of conversations do you want to have these days, and how should they connect with you?
So I actually am thinking quite a bit about obviously space nuclear, but also what is it that we want to do on the moon?
Hmm.
There's sort of this new sense that, there's this near-term race, like we need to, do what it takes to land on the moon before the Chinese do. I think we need to think a lot about what that means, and what is it that we really want to do, start, again, first principles. What are we trying to do here? So that's something, what does the lunar base look like? How do we bring the rest of the world together with us? Leader by definition means there are followers, right? So that's kind of one thing I'm thinking a lot about. Yeah, I think we are at a very fun inflection point in space exploration, space science, resource extraction, bringing the solar system into our sphere. And those are the discussions I want to have. And thank you so much for this discussion. It was fabulous.
Great. Well, best way for people to reach you on LinkedIn or some other way?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is a really great way. Yeah.
Great.
Or find me on the streets. I'm in DC all the time.
It's somewhere on the Beltway.
Come to the Beyond Earth Symposium in February 24th, 25th.
Okay.
I'll be there talking about this exact point, and a lot of people from the space sector would be there.
Okay. This episode might come out after that. It's the 13th today, so we'll see. But it's great. I appreciate you having you here. Thanks for doing this.
It is my honor. Thank you for inviting me, Jason.
Hey, this is Jason Canigan, the creator of the Cold Star Project. Thanks for joining me and Dr. Lau for this very interesting discussion about nuclear power in space. If you like this, I want to ask you to leave a 5-star review if you listen to it on audio platform, or please give it a thumbs up on the YouTube channel. I do this all the time. I listen to something, I like it. It was long form content, especially like this, and I forget to click the thumbs up button. And an hour later, I'm like, darn it, as a content creator, I do want to support other people. So please do that. It really, really makes a difference in getting people to see the channel. This is a small channel. I wish more people saw this stuff, because it's, really deep discussions. It's basically an oral history at this point of the last 5-6 years of the space industry. So if you are a startup founder, or even if you're a student graduating soon in the space industry and you're going to get into it and work, I think you should go get my latest book, not because I wrote it, but because it pulls together information from experts in various fields. It's called The Evolution of Space Entrepreneurship, and it's everything I learned in the first 5 years of talking with space startup founders who discovered, I have a cool piece of tech, but it's actually really hard to scale this thing, find customers, and get orders and make a real business out of it. Right? I spoke with space venture capitalists and regulators. They are looking for things that are entirely different than what most startup founders value. So if you go in there and you start talking to these guys without knowing what's in this book, you will fall flat on your face and you will not be funded. Okay, this is what I've learned. So go check that out. It's on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle or paperback format. I really recommend the paperback. You could probably write it off as a business training expense, right? And just take your receipt to your accountant. I'll leave the link in the description below. Go check that out. And if you do like it, go ahead and leave a review. It's very hard to get reviews for books if you're not Stephen King and already super popular on these platforms. So thanks for listening. Join us again. Give that thumbs up, and I'll see you soon.